welcome everyone. We're going to wait a few minutes for everyone to join, and then we'll kick off and start. We appreciate you joining from wherever you're calling in from. We were just talking about how our speaker panel is quite a global audience. We have attendees in Asia, in Australia, the US, and Japan. Oh, and Singapore, as well as Brazil. So it's quite a global group. In the interest of time, I'm probably just going to get moving because we have a packed set of speakers. The session will be recorded and disseminated to everyone who registered to attend, including our entire community of practice with the Resilient Cities Network. So good morning or good evening, depending on where you're calling from. It's a pleasure to be joining you all here from Washington, D.C. I hope you all are staying safe and healthy, and I look forward to when we can meet in person someday soon. My name is Carrie Browder, and I am the city's project director at Ocean Conservancy, and my primary focus is advancing circular economy, increasing community resilience, and reducing marine plastic through the Urban Ocean program. Go to the next slide, please. For those of you who are new to Urban Ocean, we are a three-way partnership between Ocean Conservancy, Resilient Cities Network, and the Circulate initiative dedicated to empower cities to reduce plastic waste, develop a circular economy, and build cleaner, healthier, and more resilient communities. More than half of the world population lives in urban areas, and while our lives in cities and peri-urban areas might seem far away from coral reefs and rainforests, the trash we generate and where the trash goes can have a huge impact. And the truth is that no matter where we are, our actions and consequences for the planet, it's all in actions and consequences for the planet that we call home. On this slide, you'll sort of see our approach of building a coalition, assessing the situation on the ground so city can make fact-based decisions, and building a platform to share best practices. Next slide, please. Before introducing our speakers, I would like to give a special thank you to our cities, collaborators, and funders for their support. We're very proud of the 11 cities that we're working with so far, mostly focused in Southeast Asia and in Latin America. And you'll see that our mentor cities are worldwide. I'd like to give a special shout out to the University of Georgia's New Materials Institute, which just completed its circularity assessment protocol in each of our cities, and our local implementation partners in each of our learning city countries who really stepped up in order to do the assessment protocol in the midst of COVID, as well as several of our funders and Noah, who's joining us today. Thank you. Next. We are thrilled to have you join us today to hear from a panel of experts on the crucial aspect of building more sustainable communities through local outreach. Inspiring behavior change is a necessary pillar to complement our transition to a more circular economy. Starting us off today, I would like to welcome Philippe Bugeaud, who's a behavioral scientist at RARE. Philip is a behavioral scientist for their Center for Behavior Change and Environment, where he translates the latest insights into application-ready behavior change interventions. He holds a PhD in behavioral neuroscience, and his past research focused on the neurobiological underpinnings of primate decision-making and the role evolution plays in biasing our choices. Next, we'll be joined by Robin Stegman. Robin is the Senior Manager of Digital Campaigns at Ocean Conservancy, where she works to inspire wonder and actions for the ocean. She has spent over 10 years developing digital media strategies that spark change for mission-driven organizations, and she is best known as the former voice of Mr. Trash Wheel and for turning the ocean cleaning machine into a global sensation. Following Robin, we will hear from Cynthia Shee, Director of Knowledge at McKinsey.org and leader of their Rethinking Recycling program. Cynthia has served on the leadership team of McKinsey.org and Rethinking Recycling since its launch in 2018 and currently works to distill insights from the field for publication and scale-up efforts. Previously, Cynthia worked as a consultant for McKinsey & Company's sustainability practice, including producing a joint report with C40 on catalyzing climate action and sustainable development in cities. Last, but certainly not least, we will conclude with reflections from one of our Urban Ocean City representatives, Keiichi Kobayashi, who's the Acting Resilience Officer for the city of Toyama, Japan. Keiichi joined the Toyama city government in 2005. After a decade of dedicated service, in 2015, he became a member of the Office of Strategic Planning and Resilience, where he was engaged in developing the city's Rockefeller-supported Resilience Strategy 2050 and the Toyama World Bank report on development knowledge. He is currently in charge of the international cooperation within the Environmental Policy Division. Welcome, speakers, and thank you for your dedication to building clean, healthy cities for clean, healthy seas. Philippe, I turn it over to you.
Perfect. Let me just share my screen quickly. We should be all set. Okay, so thank you for the intro, Carrie. Like you were saying, so I have kind of a weird background here in the sense that I'm a former behavioral neuroscientist turned conservationist, and now I work at this intersection between behavioral science basically and application. So how do we apply behavioral insights in practice? And basically my role here is to really translate the evidence and the research that's coming out into our programs at RARE. So what is RARE? For those who are unfamiliar, we're an NGO that really has worked for the last 40, 50 years all over the world. And we've developed behavior change campaigns, and we've really seen an impact at the individual and community level on different environmental challenges. So for those of you who are familiar with us, you probably also know that our roots are kind of in biodiversity conservation. But as RARE has grown, so has its focus. And so now we apply a lot of our behavior change expertise across various fields. We have our own in-house programs in sustainable farming, sustainable fisheries, climate smart agriculture, innovative finance, all that kind of stuff. And then as part of our portfolio at RARE, in 2017, we launched what Carrie was talking about, the Center for Behavior in the Environment, which is kind of our own internal nudge unit. And that's where I sit. So we're a little think tank within RARE, really helping to translate the behavioral evidence to our program-ready offices. So when we think about behavior change, when we think about environmental challenges, the one thing that we do really need to take into account is that everything is kind of related back to humans. So what we eat, what we buy, what we throw out specifically. And so whatever problems we are tackling when it comes to the environmental sector, what we're ultimately dealing with is really changing someone's behavior somewhere. So environmental problems are behavioral problems, and the solution, we think, also has to be behavioral then. And so today, what I really want to do is take you through how we think about behavior change, so show you some examples of applied behavioral science, and hopefully give you a few ideas of what you can do to tackle marine debris in your own respective cities. So let's start at the beginning. How do we typically think in the field about inducing behavior change? And we'll take the example of reducing single-use plastic bags. So we have here, we think about people, then we think about what is our outcome. We want to reduce single-use plastic bags. So what we typically would do is look at the problem and create some kind of activity or outreach campaign that hopefully then changes the value for people of using a single-use plastic bag and makes it a bit more negative than the alternatives. So hopefully what we do is that we make the alternative better for people, and then that should lead to action. So yay, people are reducing their use of single-use plastic bags. Ultimately, what we're hoping to do is that we do shift this utility value or the benefit that people see in using this bag, and we're going to use this program activity to induce this shift. And so when we think about ourselves as the field, how do we typically do this? Well, really, we rely on three more traditional levers. And I think all of us can agree. The three broad strategies are really rooted in traditional economics. And so traditional wisdom, traditional economics tells us that what we can do to change people's behavior is paying or charging people for engaging in a specific behavior. We can try policing people with laws, or we can try running education campaigns that focus on telling people why or how to do something. But basically, these are the three levers that we've really learned to use as a field, especially in the environmental sector. And that's what we do. We use money, material incentives, we use rules and regulations, or we provide information to people. But as we've been using these levers a lot more, we've also found a few problems with them. For example, material incentives can backfire. They can also crowd out other motivations, and dispensing money also costs money. So that's a big problem. Then you also have enforcement. That's very difficult for rules and regulations. You need political will. You also need resources. And then there's the big universal sin that we have. That's what we say at RARE, which is dispensing information. We have tons of information. We provide people with tons of information, but the more and more we do, the more we're starting to realizing that information isn't the solution to every problem. And so when we look at these levers, there are some problems with them, but then there's also great things about them. And the more you dig into them, then you also realize, especially looking at behavioral economics and psychology, that there's plenty of other factors that can also change behavior. And some of them will work with you, some will work against you, and some you can actually use to change behavior without having to use these three more traditional levers. So still on the theme of reducing plastic bag usage, let's take the example of a plastic bag tax, so a material incentive in this case. What we're looking at on the slide are real examples of supermarket receipts from the DC area in the US around the time that a plastic bag tax of about 5 cents per bag was introduced. So what you can see on the left is basically what happened after the tax. So you can see the fee on the receipt. What you can see on the right is that right before the tax, actually a lot of supermarkets introduced this kind of bonus for people's purchases. So if people brought their own bags, they would actually be credited 5 cents. So ultimately, the result is the same. People are spending 5 cents more if they're using a plastic bag, but in one case, it's seen as a loss. So you're actually paying to be using this plastic bag, whereas in the other case, what you're actually seeing is a gain. So if you don't use a plastic bag, you're actually winning 5 cents. Again, we're just talking about receiving 5 cents at the end. And so this framing of the problem, or of the bag tax, ultimately, is very different in both cases. In one case, in the loss frame, what Washington saw was really a decrease of about 40% in the use of single-use plastic. But when you talk about plastic bag taxes in terms of gains, there's practically no effect compared to what was happening right before. So even with material incentives, we really need to pay attention to how we frame things. And even the equivalent gain can be very different based on how you present it to people. Another thing that's very important is considering social norms. They can be a powerful ally in trying to institute change. And so, for example, researchers in the UK looked at reducing the use, again, of single-use plastic bags by prompting supermarket customers with messages about what other people think and believe. So this is what we call normative messaging. You essentially tell people what the social norm around them is for a given behavior. And so what happened? Well, compared to customers that didn't see the prompt in their supermarket, those that did reduced their plastic bag use by about 35%. So here, no material incentive. It's really just messaging. So a signpost telling people about a norm. And again, you can see it's quite effective. On average, people used about 3.12 bags, and it reduced it to 2.04. So quite a significant change when you think about millions and millions of customers. Now, don't worry, these were my only two choice bias examples involving plastic bags. I won't spend the entire talk on this. But the behavioral sciences have uncovered actually many, many more biases. And I like to show this slide just for scale. This is a few years old already, and it's a list of all the cognitive biases that people had discovered. It's probably a lot longer now, but as you can see, people like me have been very busy, probably to a point of being unhelpful. But if you actually take the time to go through this and simplify, which we've done at RARE, is you get really three simple guiding principles. The first one, context really matters. So psychologists, behavioral economists, sociologists, neuroscientists, are constantly uncovering new ways in which the ways that choices are presented to people significantly influence their decisions. So many of you have likely heard of nudging. Nudges work because they alter the context of a choice without actually changing choices for people or even the value of said choices. And then the second thing is the fact that we are social animals. So humans generally want to conform, and it's important to understand the social norms in which we are interacting, and also how different social interactions will affect people and your own intervention. And so how people see themselves within a community, what social pressures people might already be under, and also how to leverage social dynamics to support behavior change. The last one, and although we like to believe that we're very rational and very rationality driven, is that unfortunately humans are very driven by emotions. Emotions tend to overpower reason, we say, and I think everyone here can agree with that fact. So we have these three new behavioral science supported levers, if you want, and if we combine them with the older traditional ones, what we get is what we call our levers framework. So essentially 6 levers of behavior change, 3 more traditional ones that work, and 3 more behavioral sciencey ones that we're also using. And all of them together really form this toolkit that we can use to change behavior, to create programs, and to validate the efficacy really of our existing programs. So great, we have definitions. Now I want to show you really how you can think about applying these definitions, because it's great to have concepts, but what do they look like in practice? So my colleagues and I have recently reviewed a huge chunk of the literature on the environmental sector and how people think about behavior change. So I really want to present a few examples here that I think really stand out, particularly for the topic of today. So we'll start with really linking this with the levers. So let's talk about choice architecture. So from what the behavioral science tells us, really trying to modify a choice's context is best done when what we're trying to do is to change a behavior that is mostly driven by habit. So in that case, choice architecture will be very useful because you can use it to disrupt people's habits through environmental change, or you can actually use the environment to help guide the attention or the choice towards a target for yourself. So the latter is exactly what was done in the city of Copenhagen, from where this picture is taken. And that is actually part of an experiment that was run like this. So students in Copenhagen were actually handing out free caramels to people on the street. And in one condition, there were no footsteps painted on the ground. In the other condition, green footsteps were painted on the ground that led people to bins. And so after the testing period, basically a day of handing out caramels, the students went around and counted how many caramel wrappers were in the street. It doesn't seem like much, just painting footsteps on the ground. But what the effect that students actually registered and saw was that a 46% decrease in littering just by introducing these green footsteps on the ground. Doesn't seem like much again, but it really adds up. And so people don't set out with the intention to litter. But what this goes to show is that because they often don't think about it, if you actually use these more basic prompts, these choice architecture strategies, you can actually help them guide their decisions without them, again, having to think about it. And the fact that they don't think about it is also why you probably want to avoid things like information, taxes, or material incentives, because if they're not thinking about something, well, these 3 levers probably won't change much about their behavior. And this was also done in the UK. The average effect there was a bit smaller, but was done over 3 weeks instead of a few days. So you can probably guess that over time, the effects slowed down a little bit. The next great example, this time about social influences, is a study that was done in the US very recently in the state of Kansas. So you remember how at the beginning of my talk, I said that norms are very powerful because humans have an inherent need to follow them. Well, in Kansas, basically what they did was target wastewater treatment facilities. And so these facilities have a limit on the quantity of wastewater that they can discharge into bodies of water. And different facilities have different limits, but not all facilities comply with these given limits, even with fines, even with everything that's being done right now. So what researchers did was, over the span of a year, start sending normative messages, really about what other people are doing, to these wastewater treatment facilities. So here we're not targeting specific individuals, we're really targeting an organization. And what they did was send a message about what their peer facilities really were doing. So you can see the message here: X% of all Kansas municipal facilities comply to a greater extent than your own. After a year, what they found was that those facilities that had received the letters compared to control had reduced their reported permitted discharge ratio by an average of about 8%. Yeah, it doesn't sound like much, but when you think about the state of Kansas, it's a big state, a lot of water being discharged. For the price of just a few letters sent, 8% is a huge effect. So again, a great strategy if you don't want to spend the money necessarily of material incentives, of rules and regulations, or even more information. The last little campaign I want to talk about, because I also don't want to fully diss the three old traditional ways of doing things. All of these levers that I was talking about have their own place. And I think it's really important to also highlight where these places are. So we're talking about choice architecture, we're talking about social norms. Here I want to talk about a really well-designed, behaviorally informed use of material incentives. So I want to talk about this amazing program in Africa that really seeks to reduce plastic pollution through a very ingenious use of material incentives. So not all problems can be solved with just choice architecture, like I said. So it's important to look at success stories like EcoAct Tanzania here. So essentially what EcoAct Tanzania is a company that recycles plastic found on land and in the ocean and turns it into plastic timber that can then be used as a replacement for wood timber. So here targeting cleaning the environment and also reducing deforestation. But what they also did is go after the problem of plastic at its root cause. So in the city of Dar es Salaam, unfortunately, people have to pay to get their garbage picked up. And so what the people at EcoAct Tanzania realized was that even though that sounds trivial, what happens is that a lot of folks can't even afford food for their family, really. So why would you go and pay for garbage pickup? So what they've been seeing is that people actually wait until the dead of night, and then they simply go put their trash in the street. When it rains, that flows into the ocean, boom, we have plastic in the ocean. So what EcoAct Tanzania decided to do was actually, why not remove this incentive? Why not target the problem at its root cause? And so they're now working with people, lower income folks in Dar es Salaam, and they're actually offering them health insurance for their garbage. So they're collecting the plastic. Instead of making them pay for it, they're actually rewarding them with health insurance from the revenue that they're making from selling the plastic timber. So it's a great material incentive that doesn't just pay for things, it really goes to the root of the problem initially. So again, tackling deforestation and reducing plastic use. So three great examples here of choice architecture, social influences, material incentives. If there's one thing that I want you to remember today, because I think I'm almost out of time, it's really that as a field, we have 6 very wide-ranging levers at our disposal to generate behavior change. And so we've really focused on 3 for the last 50 to 100 years, but there's 3 more that are opening up with a lot more evidence that's building and a lot more insights that are coming out of the field. And also try to steer clear of assumptions and use evidence, gather evidence, and test. I think those are really key to building evidence in this field. And finally, the most important part of all, remember that we're working with humans, and humans do weird things. They don't behave like computers, none of us do. So make sure that you're designing for your target audience, not for who you assume your target audience is. So that's really key for all of these programs. So if you enjoyed this, and if you want to learn more about the levers of behavior change, you can always find us at behavior.rare.org. Otherwise, I'll be here to answer questions at the end of the panel. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Felipe. That was actually the perfect conclusion to segue into Robin's presentation. People are weird and do weird things. And our next specialist is an expert in making messages for all sorts of different types of people to enact behavior change as well. So Robin, please take it away. Oh, you're muted. There we go.
Yeah. Thank you. I was about to say the same thing, Philippe. If I could sum up in a simple sentence what I do, it's humans are weird and they do weird things, and creating communication messages that honor that. I used to work with the trash wheel, which is a trash trapping device in Baltimore on the Jones Falls River that helps prevent trash from getting into the inner harbor. We put We're famous because we put googly eyes, very large googly eyes on our trash trapper, and we turned it into a larger communication campaign. And I like to start with this slide because oftentimes when I talk about the trash wheel, people focus on the googly eyes. It's hard not to, it's very engaging, and think that's the reason why this communication campaign is done so well. But really, the principles behind the trash wheel are things that you can use for any municipal program, and you don't have to get a set of googly eyes to implement them. So for those unfamiliar, the trash wheel is, as I said, a trash trapper device, but we had an overall social media campaign that's made a big impact in Baltimore and around the world. As you can see, the trash wheel has inspired Halloween costumes, permanent tattoos, games, artwork. It's now on Baltimore coffee mugs now that people take home from tourist shops. It's really become a symbol of Baltimore, and oftentimes waste infrastructure isn't put on coffee mugs. Generally, it's not the most popular choice when we're talking about ways to represent our city. But what I want to always communicate to cities is that oftentimes when we're building a new piece of infrastructure or a new program or even existing programs, I love Your Favorite Trash Man. It is a Instagram account in Philly that is a former garbage person that became wildly successful. And so people are interested in trash in their sewers. And so they are looking for messaging. And putting a communication campaign alongside existing city infrastructure or city programs can help them do a lot more than manage your waste. They can influence public sentiment, so they can really help you create a positive voice and look for your city's waste infrastructure. It's a really great media hook if you want to get more of that press attention. The trash wheel has been a great fundraiser because it is something really salient and tangible that both individual donors and larger funders really like because it gets their brand out there. It also inspires a lot of people. And when you have that inspiration, it can help with that behavior change, like was talked about in the last presentation, advocating for policy change or recruiting volunteers, really anything you want a mass amount of people to come help you do. So as I said, while googly eyes are great and I will not knock them, the trash wheel is successful because of a larger strategy. And that strategy starts, as last presentation said, well, like by knowing people and knowing your audience and truly knowing them and not just making assumptions. And part of that is really exploring, where do they live online? Where do they live in your city? What brands already are doing a good job appealing to them? Really getting a picture of where your audience is when they're not working. What do they enjoy doing? And how can you be in those spaces that they are occupying and having fun and engaging voluntarily? So one example that I give for the trash wheel is that Baltimore is weird. We have the only football team in America named after a literary reference, and that is after poet Edgar Allan Poe, who is a strange, dark poet. We're also home with John Waters, who is a director that is literally called the King of Trash, and not the trash that we usually deal with every day. So we have a very strange city. And so when we were developing Mr. Trash Wheel's persona, we really wanted to embrace that sense. Now, that's not going to work in every city, but because of the conditions in Baltimore and because of our story of our city, that really appealed. I'll go back. One of my, knowing your audience and where your audience lives is not just physically, it's also internet. So one of the examples I love to use, because it is something that oftentimes we don't think about it as a viral sensation. This is the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. Very exciting. But one of the things that they do really well is take the language that's already being used on Twitter, the way that people are already talking, and using that to talk about their sewer systems. That could be very fun puns, that could be comments about baseball that's happening in Cleveland, but being able to really navigate social media in a way that feels part of that language and part of that community. When you're getting onto that, once you figure out who your audience is, it's time to craft a persona. And I always say social media is about people talking with people. That's what it was designed for. And so even as an institution, you want to present as a person, and that can happen a variety of ways. That could be by assigning someone or having someone to be the face of your organization. That could be having a mascot, or it could be still having your institutional brand in front, but really working on what that voice is. So that voice feels friendly and approachable, or whatever voice, clever, wise, whatever descriptive words you would describe. When people are developing a voice, I always advise like looking at real people. When we were developing Professor Trash Reel as another trash reel, we looked at like Beyonce and Bill Nye and these real like big people and the way that they talked online in order to craft that persona. So it became something that felt human and familiar. And really using real stories and examples where you can to communicate that there are people behind this monolith of an organization. Also, like looking around to see what is already popular or interesting or things that people see every day. My favorite example of this is the Field Museum has Sue the T-Rex, which is one of their most popular exhibits. And so they actually created a Twitter account giving you a guide to the Field Museum through the hilarious voice of Sue the T-Rex. It's a great example of the way that you can think about something already popular and making that the voice of your organization. One of my favorite municipal examples of this are these cute little recycling experts for a Michigan recycling campaign. They had a group of raccoons. Each raccoon had a different specialty. So this is our metal raccoon, both literally and figuratively, who is teaching you how to properly use metal recycling. And the great thing about really thinking about who your messengers are is it just opens you up to new audiences. So oftentimes people don't want to sit around their kitchen table talking about recycling, but having cute raccoons gets people to dive a little deeper and learn, because there is an interesting messenger there. So the largest step once you have that campaign and you're thinking about voice is to then invite people in. It's always great to start with meeting people where they are. So doing partnerships with organizations or again, digitally with like influencers or media organizations who are already reaching the people that you want to reach. But I always, when you on social media, again, you're a person talking to a person. So when you're creating that voice and you're creating that social media, you have to make it about your audience and what your audience is coming for. And oftentimes that is not for the messages that are most important to you. This was always a push and pull with the trash reel, but the trash reel, a big part of that was like, we were there because people wanted comedy. They wanted to brighten their day. They weren't coming for the messages about reducing their waste, but they got that after they came. At Ocean Conservancy, this is a big part of our strategy. We do a lot of facts about ocean animals, interesting articles about ocean animals. That's why people come to our website, but they're going to get a conservation message while they're there. It's a little bit of like a spoonful of sugar situation, but it's really important to think about why would the people you're talking to want to come to your site, and how can you provide them with more than just the messages you want them to hear, so they can walk away with those messages but want to come and be in your space. One way that you can invite people in is with interactivity. So probably everybody's heard of like naming, having somebody name a device or having a contest or having trivia. Those are really great. I will say one caveat is a lot of people have heard of Boaty McBoatface, which was a boat that was named through a social media contest, which was specifically like very notable because they came out of it with a name that was not something they wanted to put on their boat. Social media is a wild place. You're dealing with thousands of people who you have zero control over. Making sure that you as an organization, before you decide to enter that space where you're inviting people into your community, have guardrails. And some of that is, depending on your organization, there's going to be more of that than other organizations. But a perfect example is when the Trash Wheel ran their naming contest. We had people submit names, but we filtered through them and then picked our top 4 to have people vote on, making sure that you have checks and balances so you don't find yourself in a place where you're going to have to go against public sentiment because you said, yes, internet, you can help us name this thing, and you didn't get the result you wanted. Some of that's going to be inevitable, but there's a lot you can do to protect yourself and your organization before you enter this new space. Also, one of the things to just note is that part of doing a campaign around a waste infrastructure piece is a lot of people are going to look at it. People walk by the trash wheel every day. More people are looking at it than we are. So making sure you have plans for what happens if in case a ball python wraps itself around your battery, which is something that actually happened in Baltimore, to be able to address that situation, but also that became our biggest media hit was our response and being able to share to the world this crazy story, because ball pythons are not native to Baltimore, Maryland. So being able to figure out how to respond to inevitable situations that happen, more visibility means more people are going to watch whatever you're promoting. And so just making sure that you have a good strategy for rapid response and to hopefully meet and amplify it when you have unexpected snakes wash up or whatever that unexpected piece is. One example that I really love for just bringing people in, this is a campaign done by the Sydney Opera House. This was about 10 years ago when they had construction. Nobody likes construction, I think. Around the world, we can agree with that. And so they knew they were going to have this unsightly construction. So what they did was they put parental applications, like things that actually looked like something you might fill out if you were renting a home, with asking for photos and stories, but asking people to quote unquote move in to the Sydney Opera House while they were in construction. And so they took those photos and those stories, and on the barricades between the construction, turned it into literally inviting people in to turn this into a space that was engaging and not unsightly, and really bringing people into that piece and to interact. The last piece I'll say is, getting creative. The greatest example that I have is that we at the Trash Wheel wanted to do a behavior change campaign, but we always want to do something a little differently. So we basically couched it in a secret society. We challenged people to commit 5 actions that would benefit the water system. So these were things like keeping fats, oil, and greases out of the sewer system, to picking up trash at their local waterway, to educating their fellow citizens about dog poop and why they should clean up after their dog. Really fun stuff. But we made these challenges so that if you completed all of them, you would join the secret society. We had an actual ceremony, including black robes and an initiation and everything else. But we really wanted to do this because we wanted to make these behavior change campaigns engaging, to provide something for our audience that was a little bit more than you'll just feel good. And as a result, this campaign was 10 times more successful than any of the behavior change campaigns that we had ever run before, in terms of actually getting people to do the action and to commit. And also, because they felt like they were part of the secret society, they were continuing to do those actions because they felt this was a sense of community and a sense of duty that they had going on. I'll just say, we're almost to the end, so I'll just quickly say another example is Trash Dance, which is a wonderful movie about a choreographer who choreographed garbage trucks and garbage men into this really nice dance and public art. We worked with a local water ballet, which is essentially a mix of synchronized swimming and art, to put together, unfortunately, a never seen, because it was scheduled for 2020, water ballet about Baltimore's waste infrastructure issues, that was able to combine art but provide messaging about what happens. And so it was followed basically water tour from the street of Baltimore through the sewer system and showed the different components of how trash ends up in the ocean. But it was all done through this language of this water ballet. So I bring this up just as an example that you don't have to do this alone. Every city has artists and cultural institutions that have boundless creativity. And so in this situation, we saw a movie, we just asked a local organization, and it evolved into something beyond any of us could dream of. So I will end by just saying, again, this is something, these pieces seem large, but the principles here are things that you can do with any piece of infrastructure you might have. It really is about meeting your audience where you are, understanding where they live, what they want, creating a voice, again, that feels human, that feels like something that they can connect to on a level. I always say, like, you want it to sound like somebody speaking to you and not watching a PSA, because humans are social creatures. Like, we want to have that sense of connection. And as weird as it sounds, like, we create senses of connection with brands all the time. And part of the reason we do that is because brands present themselves in a way that feels like a sense of community. So creating that sense of community, again, always making sure that you're on the back end preparing for what that interaction might mean for your organization in a way that you have guardrails that everybody feels comfortable, because once you have that, you can be a little bit more risky because you've mitigated some of the risk. And then finally, we always talk about doing your part, but really figuring out a way to make doing your part something that people really want to, like, bring into their lives, that is fun, that is engaging, that is a little bit more than I feel guilty, so I'm going to do this, and more that I want to do this because this is the kind of person I am and this brings me joy.
That presentation brought me joy, Robin. Thank you so much. I just wanted to say that we do anticipate we're going to end the presentations right on time. And then so we will continue with Q&A. And if you need to drop off in the top of the hour, that's fine. The Q&A will be recorded and disseminated to everyone who registered for the event. But yes, Robin, thank you so much for helping keep Baltimore weird and clean. We appreciate that. Cynthia, if you'd now like to take over.
Definitely. That was such an inspiring set of presentations, and I just want to use my time to sort of build off of that. Philippe, you'll probably be pleased to know that we use RARE's behavior-centered design framework as we onboard new people to our team. And Robin, I've gotten so many ideas to bring back to our teams for how we kind of enhance our social media and kind of make infrastructure into icons. So that's wonderful. So quickly, McKinsey.org launched a flagship initiative a few years ago called Rethinking Recycling, where we're empowering every community to build self-sustaining and inclusive and environmentally impactful recycling systems. And so in order to do that, we're connecting the entire recycling value chain, beginning with people in households changing their behavior and connecting that to the waste collection system, down to the sorting and recycling and composting centers, all the way into where those things get put back into productive use in the economy. So we kind of work across that value chain, but as you can imagine, everything starts at the beginning. So public outreach and locally appropriate public outreach is really critical to what we do. I won't repeat all the wonderful principles that Philippe and Robin already touched on, because I think that we really try to incorporate some of those as well, but just to kind of illustrate with a few other examples. The places that we work really vary. We work in emerging economies. And so in Buenos Aires, we work in an informal settlement called Barrio Mujica. It's a 40,000 resident community in which there's a lot of complexities in terms of how people get their infrastructure and their services, but we've launched a pretty successful recycling and composting program there, really the first of its kind in Argentina. And in the mid-sized city of Olavarria, we're working with the municipality to do kind of a full transformation of the waste management system. And part of that is really kind of connecting it to circular economy opportunities in the local region. Olavarria has a wonderful industrial kind of history and a lot of kind of industrial hub potential. So we're really kind of trying to connect the dots there as well. And in Indonesia, we are working in southern Bali with a number of urban villages called desas, who are responsible for waste management for their communities. And based on a successful proof of concept pilot we've now launched the Rethinking Recycling together, so that to Philippe's point about making it social, like they really get to kind of see that this transformation is happening along with others, and they get to kind of have peers as they go through this program. So a lot of different contexts that we're working in. So I wanted to share a few stories about how we've applied some of these behavior change and public outreach principles, and how the outcomes might look a little different in these very different communities, but the principles kind of remain the same. To Philippe's point about, and Robin's point about really understanding your audience and doing your homework, we really try to map that landscape. So we really take the time to do the interviews and the kind of walking through and the home visits in some cases, to understand local value systems, to understand the power dynamics, who influences whom, who follows whose lead, and also the barriers to action. Like, what are the things that prevent people from building the habit that we want them to build? And that looks different when we ask the same questions in different places, we get different answers. So one example is when we worked in Bali, we came in maybe naively thinking that, well, the ocean plastics problem is so acute and so visible in Bali that surely people already know the environmental issue and they care about it and they're eager to take action. What we found actually is that a lot of local residents had kind of come to a place of resignation or almost acceptance of that kind of as a situation. And so the individual motivation to do things for the environment wasn't so much what we found to be powerful. What was powerful is that the local DESAs are also very influential cultural authorities. And so people really take their lead from the DESA leaders, and in particular, some of these decrees that come out almost as kind of cultural guidances. And so this off to the right is a letter that actually came out officially from the DESA saying, this is something that we are all now doing. We are going to be separating our waste into recyclables, compostables, and what goes to landfill. Everybody is supposed to get on board. And that really had the greatest effect in our program, which was, at least to us, a bit surprising. But we've really leaned into that and made sure that all of our outreach really reflects that official kind of DESA imprimatur. On the other side of the spectrum, though, when we worked in Barrio Mujica at the informal settlement, there's a really low trust relationship with the government there, and even neighbor to neighbor, because people are immigrants coming in very difficult situations, and they often don't actually trust the people who are living right next door to them. So appealing to community, appealing to authority, to that kind of authoritative message really was not going to work here. But in having conversations with people on the ground and testing some of our messaging, as well as some of our program design with them, a couple of things emerged that we, again, found a bit surprising. One is people were actually aware of the global ocean plastics problem, and they knew about marine pollution. They knew about this problem with waste. And it was empowering for them to know that they could take some small action in their lives to contribute and do their part to solving that problem. So you'll see on the right that there's a slogan that we put on some of the infrastructure, such as it is, Reciclo por el planeta, recycle for the planet. And that was the message more than, for your neighborhood or for, your family, that really resonated. On the other hand, we also found that people have very kind of immediate needs, and really appealing to the sense that when you do this, something immediately will happen that you can see. We found that people were upset about the informal dump sites that spring up around the barrio. And knowing that our program was linked to cleaning up those sites really felt like that there was some sort of relationships they were building to sort of cause and effect. Like, I do my part, and then something that's really been making it hard for my kids to play in the street, or hard for me to feel safe walking around, also gets addressed. So building that kind of social compact. So same kind of questions and investigation and curiosity, two very different answers in different communities. The second lesson, which we have the privilege of doing because we work across the recycling value chain like this, is that we really try to integrate the public outreach with the actual operations of the system, of the waste management and recycling system. And I know Robin and Mr. Trash Wheel is a really great example of this as well. So one thing that we know about kind of the choice architecture and the kind of environment in which people make decisions, these small cues can really make a big difference. So in both Olavarria in Argentina, as well as in our Indonesia program, in some of our early pilots, we found that people would recycle for a little while and then they would stop. So when we followed up with them to say what happened, they said, well, I separated my waste, and then this truck came by and just mixed it all back up together again. And like, I don't know why I bother. And that wasn't actually true. There were compartments inside the truck, but that wasn't visible to them. And they felt like their actions didn't make a difference, and they didn't trust that someone else was holding up their end of the bargain. So there were two changes that we've made in our programs to kind of reinforce that sense of showing commitment, that if you do your part, we will do ours. One is making sure that the trucks are really clearly labeled so that they know that the recyclables are going in the recyclables truck. They're not getting mixed with anything else. The other thing is we changed to a scheduled collection system where different trucks come on different days. So that again reinforces that sense of commitment by the system to honor this new habit and this new effort that people are making. Finally, there's a lesson of investing in partners. This may seem a bit obvious, but it was something that we missed in the beginning. We're really glad that we kind of leaned into this. The public outreach part, people can tend to lean into the public aspect of it, and maybe sometimes neglect actually really engaging the implementation partners that you have in making your whole program work. So one of the things we realized is that we really wanted to bring along every person that we work with in really understanding the changes that we're making. So we try to treat every member of the team as a kind of change agent for what we're trying to do. This photo is from, again, Barrio Mujica. There are labor cooperatives that operate inside the informal settlement, and some of them run the waste collection system. So this is them being basically ambassadors of the program, going door to door and explaining, here's what we do, here's the changes that we're making. If you have any questions about how to sort your waste, we are here. And there was a lot of training that went behind that to help build people's confidence in doing that kind of face-to-face engagement, making sure they were empowered to answer all the questions that might come up. And also creating that kind of social proof that, this is a member of my, of my neighborhood who faces the same barriers that I do, has the same cramped space where it's really hard to separate waste, but they have done this and they can help me kind of go on that journey as well. A little bit, I'll touch very quickly on the impact that it's had, because we also really believe in data and evidence and monitoring. So in instituting these systems, we're really proud to say that we're achieving 30 to 40% consistent participation in our programs, which is really huge for us because we're kind of going from zero and asking people to build this whole new habit. And it's also comparable to some US cities that have been having recycling programs for decades. We've also have some exciting preliminary evidence in our Indonesia program that some of the new ways that we've tweaked our program are yielding results of 70% participation or higher. So we're really trying to figure out how to build on that success. And the material impacts of that are very real. We've been able to make the sorting center for recyclables going from loss-making to profitable in less than 4 months, partly thanks to these behavior changes. And we've been able to increase the salary of the waste workers in Argentina based on the new income from the recyclables. We're going to continue to kind of build the evidence base for that. We're currently assessing kind of the return on investment of this kind of behavior change for all the cost and effort that you put into it. Kind of how long does it take to pay itself back in avoided costs, in the increased value of the recyclables, and kind of saved operational costs. So we're excited to share that later this year. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Cynthia. I think we would all be really excited to see that report once it's released, that even though the emotional appeal is important to the masses, at the end of the day, an economic appeal is also important if we're going to catalyze more investment in this space. Keiichi, if you would like to take us home and provide your thoughts and reflections, please.
Is that okay?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Yep. Hi, I'm Keiichi, International Section Chief of Environmental Department of Toyama City Government. I'm going to introduce about the environmental education program set by the city government, especially for the kids, school kids. So currently in Japan, education on garbage is mainly provided to 3rd or 4th grader of elementary schools, according to the curriculum set by the central government. But our environmental department has a supplemental education program on garbage and marine debris for elementary schools and preschools according to their request. So Toyama is located between Tokyo and Osaka, facing the Sea of Japan, surrounded by the magnificent Tateyama mountain range to the south. Toyama City's population is about 420,000, but due to the low birth rate, the population is expected to decline to nearly 370,000 by 2040. So fresh seafood is very famous and popular in Toyama, and you can enjoy it for half the price of Tokyo. So now let's start with an explanation of our environmental education initiative called 3R Promotion Program. So this is a classroom scene of 3R Promotion Program providing to elementary school students. As the name suggests, the program was implemented to promote 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. But since 2 years ago in the fall, we have added content on marine debris as an option. So the program is always about 1 hour long, but children usually cannot concentrate for that long. So we use a lot of illustrations in text and show an actual paga truck, and sometimes do simple skits so as not to bore them. So the figure on the right is an excerpt from the text saying to refuse plastic bags, choose refillable products when you're shopping. So these are other excerpts from the text we use for the program. Upper left shows that 80% of the garbage on the coast is dumped on land. Upper right says that even Toyama Bay has a lot of marine garbage. Bottom left, we teach about microplastic pollution. Bottom right, it shows that the amount of waste thrown away in a year in Toyama City is equivalent to 640 swimming pools, which is 160,000 tons, and explains the importance of reducing waste. When explaining to preschool children, especially, we use simple and plain words as much as possible. So this is the trend chart of 3R promotion projects in recent years. Last year, the number of programs offered was reduced due to the coronavirus, but this year it's the highest number of implementations so far, even though the year is not over. So about 30% of all requests for the 3R promotion program come from preschools, and with the growing interest in plastic waste in recent years, we have received a lot of requests for marine debris content by elementary schools. This slide is not directly related to plastic pollution, but do you know how many types of paper Japanese people sort out for garbage? The answer is 4. Newspapers, magazines, cardboard, and paper containers such as boxes and wrapping paper. So Japan's collection rate of used paper was about 40% in 1970, but the number rose to 85% in 2020, so which is one of the highest in the world. I haven't compared the Japanese government's environmental education with that of other countries, so I can't say for sure, but I think ours works reasonably well in terms of raising awareness about sorting waste. So this is a product that you often see at convenience stores in Japan. But in Japan, where many people live alone, you can buy a single boiled egg and that egg is carefully packaged in plastic. So Japanese people are not greatly opposed to the detailed separation of garbage, but there are still many such products on the market. This is because cleanliness is so crucial to Japanese people. Toyama City's recycling rate is about 25%, which is 5% higher than the average for municipalities of the same size nationwide. However, the amount of waste generated per capita is higher than average too. One of the reasons for that is Toyama has a large number of double income households, and they buy a lot of prepackaged meals packaged in plastic. So I don't think that reducing the amount of garbage can happen overnight, but it's important to persistently raise the individual awareness about the garbage and the plastic pollution. So in our program, we tell children that they should refrain from buying products with excessive plastic packaging. So we hope that the children who participate or have participated in the program will not buy such products, and on top of that, they will have some positive impact on the adults around them. So this is not a direct educational program, but we have been working on projects to raise awareness of marine debris outside schools. We have wrapped streetcars, put up large flags on Toyama Station, and designed shared bikes in the city center. So this is our net project, a trial project we are doing in Toyama. We place nets in rivers and irrigation canals to prevent household plastics from flowing into the ocean. I won't explain the project in detail today, but the aim of this project is to inform neighboring cities of the result after the trial is finished, and share ways to collect plastic effectively if there are any requests. Obviously, these nets are not at all adorable like Mr. Trash Wheel. So I think we need to turn this net icon somehow. So anyway, this is our net project. So, and lastly, let me introduce what I think is a very unique project, Ocean and Guardians. It's a multiplayer in-person card-based game that teaches students the importance of having a clean ocean. It is still under development, but it will be completed soon. The plastic pollution problem is similar to a monster that slowly drains players' health. So the concept of this game is when you are not looking, marine debris accumulates rapidly. So this debris becomes monsters, and the players must work together to defeat the monsters, aka clean the sea. The company is in charge of the production has already developed a card game on the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, which is also available in English. The name of the English version is 2030 SDGs game. I think a card game is one of the easy ways to draw attention of young people compared to, for example, like making them read textbooks. We're going to incorporate this card game into our education program after the development is complete. So that's it. I hope my presentation is informative for you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Keiichi. I think if we could bring Mr. Trash Wheel to Toyama and you could send us lots of card games to different cities that we're working in, it would definitely be mutually beneficial. So we'll continue now with a few questions that I've received that we'll record and disseminate later. First question is actually for you, Robin. Mr. Trash Wheel is now in place in other areas in the world, such as Panama. Do you have any recommendations for countries and citizens purchasing trash devices like Mr. Trash Wheel to make their campaigns really successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is the actual trash device, while it is incredible, is important to your city, and finding a trash device that is right for your city. And that might be the trash wheel device, that might be something else. Really, the marketing campaign that is associated with the trash wheel could be used for any device. And every river, if you're looking at river capture, is different depending on flow and situation. So when you're actually looking to choose a device, it's really important to take into consideration the local environmental concerns when choosing which one to do. And I've seen this work with devices as small as sea bins. It's really about building a campaign with whatever works for you in your city.
Thank you. And then for Keiichi, how can Toyama City share its education programs with other cities, particularly cities in the Global South?
Well, sorry, can you say that again, please? How
would you propose sharing some of your education programs with other cities? So the ones that have been successful, how can we help amplify those in the Global South?
Well, I would say to develop the material, which is very easy to understand the kids, but in a lot of Southeast Asian countries, not only for kids but also adults need to be kind of educated to know how to sort garbage or stuff like that. So well, I would say yeah, just develop the material for all generations. So that would be probably helpful.
Thank you. For Cynthia, in the different locations where you all are implementing your recycling program, are there any common threads as far as types of strategies for behavior change that you're using in each, or is each city or country different?
It's a great question. We're actually finding that there are overall more commonalities than differences. And so that's really enabling us to build a kind of standardized approach that we feel is really scalable. That's really what we're focused on now. How do we scale across different cities in Latin America, different cities in Indonesia and elsewhere in Southeast Asia, hopefully other geographies globally as well. The main things that we're trying to develop are, as I mentioned briefly, like what are the right questions to ask when you come into a new community? How do you kind of quickly tailor to that specific context without kind of reinventing everything from scratch? And so we start to get a bit of pattern recognition, and hopefully whoever asked the question, for your program or your effort, you will too, that over time we realize everybody needs some kind of equipment to do their recycling at home. That may just look a little different, but we can start to see these kinds of patterns and how we might ask the right design questions. Everyone's going to need these kind of reinforcements from the operations of the system. So what are those specific kinds of initiatives we want to create? So we kind of have an overall playbook emerging, and then what that ends up manifesting as at the end of the sort of design and understanding the community process will look a little bit different. But yes, it can be, you can take a sort of a templatized approach to a certain extent, for sure.
Thank you very much. Then sort of to the group, I don't know if someone wants to chime in here, but we're talking about secret ingredients for success. And I know we talked definitely about emotional appeals a lot, but if you have any other ideas as to what would be a secret ingredient to a successful strategy, what would they be? And since you're unmuted, Keiichi, I'm going to call on you first.
Oh, sorry.
A secret ingredient to your success beyond an emotional appeal.
Well, let me answer the later. So please skip me.
Robin or Philippe, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. I mean, I think for me, at least, one of the big secret ingredients is just the humans you get on board. And so to me, I think the biggest thing is knowing your audience and knowing the people around you and having a really deep understanding of the humans in your city and how those humans operate can really help no matter what you're looking for. It always starts with that knowledge base.
Yeah, if I can jump in quickly on that too. I think that the two things I would add is always look at the social norms for everything. The social aspect of behavior is always going to be super important. And Cynthia mentioned earlier, like things like social proof, and you also have social norm messaging. Norms will either really help you or really impede your efforts. So it's really important to be aware of them. And I think another thing people need to really take into account is how much of our behavior is just habitual, how much of the stuff we do we don't really think about. And so you can think of strategies that guide these irrational, if you want, or unplanned behaviors that will be really, really effective just because they're basically guiding our habits. So those are kind of two strategies that I would say keep in mind on top of everything else you're already doing.
Okay, yeah, I would
But also
say.
quickly add,
Sorry.
Keiichi, go ahead.
Oh, okay, yeah. I would say the key.
Please go ahead.
Is to be consistent and to repeat communication, to have a lot of communication to the community. So like shared value. So that's the one of the most important ways. Yeah.
Thank you. And Cynthia, sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that our secret ingredient has really been bringing locals into our team and really testing ideas early and often with them, because they really kind of have the pulse of the community in a way that we never will. And so we've really kind of avoided kind of more expensive and more involved mistakes when someone said like, that really just sounds off and like, that's not going to resonate, or that will resonate with some people, but not with others. It'll really rub other people the wrong way. Or maybe you rephrase it this way. And that's really been tremendous for us.
Thank you. And then this is a question I actually don't think would be for all of you, but if you were going to work with the city, who exactly is it that you need to work with? Is there a specific office that we need to engage with in order to advance these sort of campaigns for reducing plastic pollution? And it might be different city to city, but in your experience, what have you experienced?
Oh.
Maybe I'll jump in with a quick story that of a mistake that we made in Indonesia, administrative authority and a cultural authority. And we were really pursuing the administrative authority thinking, well, this is the group that manages, the waste management system, and they're the ones going to be doing the outreach. When in fact, it was the cultural authority that really was going to be shaping people's behavior and really kind of had the voice that people listen to. So it took us some time years that we should be.
Cynthia, your connectivity is a bit low. You might want to try turning off your video.
Partnering with more so than the folks who technically own the waste management infrastructure.
I think we lost you at the end, unfortunately, Cynthia, but I will, we'll get your answer and include it in the follow-up. Robin or Keiichi, did you want to speak to who you worked with at the city level, please?
In my city, or not only in my city, but in Japan, usually the environmental department is in charge of this kind of stuff. So yeah. So in Japan, yes.
We definitely worked with our Department of Public Works in Baltimore, but I would say, that it really is oftentimes an effort that requires multiple partners and untraditional partners. And so really casting that net wide, I think, as Cynthia's, at the start of Cynthia's story, I think illustrated, is that there are a lot of people who are messaging for a city or who are reaching people that you might not think initially would be people who could be part of that campaign, but could be really great messengers for your work.
Great, thank you. And then around the topic of messaging, we have a question about public communications when working with corporations. Say a corporation that might be a plastic producer wants to support a recovery or recycling project. How would you go about managing public communications around that? Do you want to go first, Robin? You're on
I
mute.
can. I can go with that. Yeah. So no, it's totally fine. I can start with that. I think it's always really complicated to be in those situations. I think the biggest thing, two biggest things that I would say is first, spend a lot of time developing that messaging and preparing for possible questions that you could get before launching the campaign, and really make sure you circulate that throughout all of your organization. When we have like a big partnership, we make sure that we equip every staff member, especially staff members who are public facing, with what our response is to a particular partnership, because again, like every part of your organization is going to be messaging on that, not necessarily just people who are in the first line with the community. So that would be my big piece, is like whenever you develop that messaging, you make sure everybody has it. And the second is just approach it like a human with transparency. I think audiences generally really appreciate when there is a sense of, when you have a stance. I think a lot of times there are times where it's like we want to create a face that kind of like sweeps issues under the rug, but you're still going to get questions. Like no matter what, people are going to ask the questions that you really wish they wouldn't ask. And I think being able to respond to that and to be transparent about that and developing that messaging is really important.
Thank you so much, Robin. Did anybody else have any other thoughts on how to message when partnering with the private sector? Anyone? Well, Robin, I think you summed it up for all of us. I think that's it for questions. I want to thank all of our speakers again for taking the time, and just remind everyone who is still watching that we will follow up with the recording. We will also make several of the slides available, and we were going to be sharing the next Urban Ocean resource page on the newest, less common levers for behavior change that have been developed with Philippe Beaujot and the RARE Behavior Change Center. So keep an eye out for that. Based on Cynthia's presentation, I hope we can do something in the future on the return on investment for behavior change, which is really exciting. And then please stay tuned. Things will be really picking up for Urban Ocean, leading to our Accelerator Summit next year, which we hope will catalyze scaling these solutions to communities all over the world. So I want to thank our speakers and all of our guests today for their commitment to building clean, healthy cities for clean, healthy seas. And please don't hesitate to reach out in the future. Have a good day or evening, wherever you're calling from. Have a good one. Bye, guys.